Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
I'm former Congressman John Sweeney. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and this is Inside Addiction.
John, tell me how it was growing up for you.
You know, I grew up in a very loving family and home, not unlike the average American family in the late 50s throughout the 60s. The one distinction I guess I would make that now a couple of years in recovery that I recognize is how foreign the concept of alcoholism was to me and how accepted it was within my family unit, drinking and the use of alcohol throughout my house. I grew up, kind of a lonely kid in some respects. My mom, in that era, many women stayed at home and were stay-at-home moms. My mom was a professional person. She worked. My father worked. And so a lot of my life lessons came on my own, either with the people who were caretaking for me or just in hanging out on the streets and finding it from people. That having been said, it was a pretty average life.
So, how was school for you growing up? Did you have any hobbies? How
Yeah.
was life at home?
I was a difficult child. I was always diagnosed as being hyperactive and very active. And frankly, I had a hard time fitting into a lot of situations in a lot of places. I was full of anxiety. As I look back now, I recognize all of that. I was in trouble in a small way. I was always acting out. I remember my mom coming home from teachers' conferences in tears, and yet the teachers would always say if John could only settle down and apply himself, he'd do really well. I was a little rebellious. The hobbies I had, I was in Cub Scouts and then Boy Scouts, and then I discovered sports, and sports was a way for me to interact with people and really relate to people and feel like I belonged. Because feeling like I belonged was always a search that I was undertaking.
So, tell me about the first time that you can remember ever using.
Gee, I think I was 12 years old. I was hanging out with my buddies. The ideas of drinking and smoking cigarettes and girls changing and sex and things like that. I remember that summer was pretty prevalent. My dad, who had worked in a brewery at one point in his life, always had cases of beer lined in the basement, in the garage of the house. And my father would sit up at night and drink beer and read newspapers and watch television, and it was a normal process. He wasn't abusive. He was just someone who drank very heavily. My buddies and I decided it'd be interesting, exciting, cool if we were to steal a couple of those quarts of beer. And we did that and went up into the hills around where I lived and drank the beer. I remember the first taste of it. It wasn't that great. It was kind of bitter, it seemed to me. But I also remember the feel of it. And I remember that night, that warm feeling, that feeling of being almost carefree, of being giddy. And I was off to the races with that. I remember subsequent to that, any time that my buddies and I decided that that was something we wanted to do, and we did it once in a while. We would always, the biggest challenge and almost the excitement of it was not getting caught or trying to ensure you didn't get caught. And then the feeling of being drunk. I remember that night feeling almost freed and liberated from a lot of that tension that I'd always felt, or that a lot of that not belonging that I'd always felt as a kid.
So, your life continues, and how does your addiction continue, and how does that progression come to pass in accordance with how your life?
Well, at 12, I was a little bit off to the races. Although I took some time off from my drinking career. I would only we would only do it on occasion. But I did grow up in the '60s, and society was going through a lot of changes. The use of drugs was becoming more noticed, more prevalent, more accepted in some respects as a means of expression by people. I had two older sisters who, a lot of the cultural debates that were going on in this society at the time were happening in my house. And some of them centered around the notion of drugs versus alcohol, and in some respects, the use of drugs, marijuana in particular, but other drugs as well, became a form of expression and independence. And as I turned into a teenager, I started to become a more regular user of substances that affected my mood, that altered my moods. I drank a lot. I think I began to drink a lot early and often. I drank as a blackout drinker. I drank as a weekend drinker. I would drink on during the week, and I'm talking now as I entered my sophomore, junior, and senior years of high school. I smoked a lot of pot. I did almost any other drug that became available. I experimented a lot in that period of time. And again, retrospectively, as I've gotten sober and I've cleared my head a little bit, I look back at that time. And some of that was the natural seeking who I was, what my identity was at that period of time. And some of that really was about losing myself and making sure that I wasn't going to feel those feelings of insecurity that were prevalent throughout my mind. That sense of not really fitting in and not belonging and not knowing where I belonged, some of which is natural at that age. But I was always at my best or most comfortable when I was stoned or drunk. And I was one or the other pretty much every weekend, and I was one or the other more frequently, especially the older I got, as I got into my senior year of high school, during the week and all the time. I began to lose interest in my hobbies, for example. I began to quit the football team. I began to want to be out more. I was separated from my family as much as I could be. I distanced myself from my family, in part because I didn't want them to know about my use and how I felt. But it was, as I look back now, I was setting the framework, the foundation, if you will, for a life of drinking, a life of drinking and or drugging, and losing myself in substances.
So after high school, you go to college, and ultimately you go to law school. Tell me a little bit about how going from high school to going to college to going to law school, how as your education progressed, so did your addiction.
It wasn't a direct line. And again, as I look back, I recognize that my reckless behavior as it related to alcohol and substance use, my strong, the drive that I had and how I was drawn to that really interfered. I ended up dropping out of college in my second year, largely because I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be, and I spent the next couple of years searching for that answer, usually in bars and usually at parties. And it wasn't until I got to my late teens, early 20s, that I decided that I needed to apply myself in a better way, and I went back to school. All of this time, I would consider myself a pretty steady, strong, heavy user of alcohol. All of this time experimenting with drugs like cocaine, shot heroin once. Pretty much the sky was, anything was the limit. I was going to say the sky's the limit, but it was really cellar was the limit. I would go wherever I needed to go to, one, be accepted, to two, feel better or not feel about myself, or three, not feel at all. And my social life and my practical life really revolved around planning the party, planning the next drink, planning. My friends were all people who lived similar ways. Therefore, I got into some trouble. Most of it was minor scrapes and things of that nature. Money was always tight. We were always trying to find ways to be able to pay for the partying that we wanted to do. And at some point, I got tired of being broke, and I got tired of being ordered around and bossed around by people in second-rate type jobs. I went back to school and began to apply myself again. And it's at that stage in my life that I think I was a very highly functional alcoholic and user. I had a mission, I had a goal, I was able to do that, I was able to separate that part of my life from the rest of it. But the minute after class ended, John was back out doing what John always did. It was hanging out at bars, it was drinking, it was doing whatever substance that I could find in order to fit in and in order to feel good. I got married relatively young age. I was 22 years old when I got married, 21, 22. And in a short period of time began to have children. Survived a very rocky first year of marriage that was very alcohol driven. I'd gotten a job as a professional and was becoming more active in the community around me. The interesting thing about the job I got, which was a perfect job at the time for John and his drinking, was I was the Stop DWI coordinator in Rensselaer County. And why that was the perfect job was I had been arrested in 1979 for drunk driving. Back in that day, the drunk driving arrests were treated fairly lightly. And now I was running a program where I was first trained in what you had to do to run such a program and what the police ought to be doing in looking for folks and interacting with a lot of police officers. I would find as my life went on that in terms of my drinking career, it was a great career move because it taught me the tricks of the trade. It also allowed me to stay in denial. It was always easier to judge other people rather than look at myself. And it was also a period of time in which I was allowed to enable my own drinking and alcoholism because who was going to question me? Not too many people. I was in that position that I was sort of held out of it. I went to law school. It was a very tough task. To capture it all in one statement about it was I used to have to drive from Troy, New York after a full day's work to Springfield, Mass. It's about 100 miles door to door to attend classes at night. I was in a carpool initially, but many of the carpool members I was with either transferred out or quit going to school, so I found myself alone driving to and from and wanting to quit my pursuit of law school. I had 2 small children at home at the time. And in order to keep going, I used to treat myself to either a bottle of Jack or a 6-pack of beer on the way out to Springfield. And then whatever was left over, I knew where the liquor store was or the package store was in Springfield, right off the campus. I'd pick up whatever refills I needed, and then I would head back home that night, feeling very sorry about and lonely about myself, but getting that good buzz that kept me going. Graduated from law school, passed the bar, and left my job running the DWI program, Stop DWI program, and began a very active life in politics in a broad state and national sense.
So you get into politics, and how does your alcoholism, how does your addiction change one way or another in accordance with your decision to get into the field of politics? You held a pretty powerful position for a while.
Yeah, I worked for 20 years. I was in a position of real responsibility, and politics being a social business. I think any endeavor, if you're an alcoholic, you will pursue your disease. Your disease will allow you to pursue, or you'll find a way to pursue that disease. Politics and government offered me a lot of opportunities to do that and justifications to do that because it is so social. It's not a 9-to-5 existence. At the end of every day or the afternoons on, you're going to receptions and dinners and things of that nature where consumption, nobody's keeping track of how much you're drinking because nobody's keeping track. You're moving around pretty good. I found that I liked that part of that existence. Quite frankly, I had, when I qualify at a 12-step program, I often talk about the dark days of drinking, and there were many more dark days of drinking than good, but there were some good. And in that good, the thrill of being places with people that are well known and the partying life certainly was part of that. It wasn't the central part of the career itself, but it was part and parcel to what you had to do. And I could do both, and I could do both fairly well, at least in my mind. So my alcoholism progressed to the point that I got elected to Congress. I was at a very high level in state government, having been the Commissioner of Labor in New York and then a Deputy Chief of Staff to a governor. Ran for my seat in Congress in 1998, and I was having problems, social problems. I was having problems in relationships. My marriage had broken up. A lot of it was about my own selfishness, and a lot of it was that selfishness involved a career, but a huge element of that selfishness involved my desire to just meet John's wants and be able to drink. And be able to go and come as I please, not be necessarily responsible for other people. Around 2000, as relationships were breaking apart, as my profile was being raised up and the pressures of performing on the job were becoming greater and greater, I took the first look I had ever really taken at my drinking. Went to a couple of AA meetings, talked to people I know who were in recovery, found sobriety, and began to think about the idea that maybe I had a problem. But I was easily able, over a period of time, I stopped drinking for almost a year, but I was easily able to rationalize my behavior by just recognizing that maybe I was a heavy drinker, but I was highly functional. Look at how successful I am, and I had been. And I went right back into it and drew myself and attracted myself to people who were just like me.
So at what point did you realize, hey, I need help? So fill in the blank. I knew I needed help when?
I knew I needed help when I got arrested for the second time for drunk driving. That's when I actually sought help. I knew I needed help sometime in the blur between a first arrest, losing an election, losing a marriage, the first arrest, and the second arrest. My disease progressed, and my subconscious recognition of how dark my life was becoming more and more apparent to me. I knew I had a problem when I couldn't stop drinking and my drinking had become a routine of every day. I knew I had a problem when I would get up in the morning and I would talk about, I'm not going to drink today, and then find that I couldn't not drink that day. I knew I had a problem when I got out of bed in the morning and couldn't remember what I had done the night before. I knew I had a problem and that happened more than once. I knew I had a problem when I started to have high blood pressure issues. I would routinely have anxiety attacks. I routinely would have the sweats and the shakes. And I knew I had a problem when I looked around at all the people I cared about and loved, and I was really quite distant from them. And I felt a very deep sense of pain. It all kind of culminated into that thank God moment when I was arrested the second time, although it took even then a day or two for me to really get to that point of recognition. The first thing I did after I got arrested the second time was, and got released from jail, was to go get a couple glasses of wine in me, because I was so full of angst and anxiety, and I couldn't stand that and deal with that I needed to numb myself some more. It was sometime subsequent to that I laid in bed and thought about killing myself, and really began to plan it out rather meticulously. And at some point, the notion that I have 3 children at this particular time, and those kids have not had a good father. I may have provided a lot of material things for them. I may have given them some things that, and I loved them very much, and they may or may not have known that. But I wasn't a very good father. And the night of my second arrest, my then youngest daughter also was arrested for underage drinking, which I think was God's way of making me recognize where I had failed and where I was short. And I really made the fundamental decision that I had time, and I had to stop being so selfish, that I had time to go back and make amends and make that right, and start being a good father and a good power of example to those kids. And that's I then decided that I would seek whatever this thing recovery was that was involved with people getting sober. I would seek that, at least because I had had a taste of it 10 years earlier, and I would try to figure out what that was all about.
So, tell me how it is since you got sober.
Well, I went to a rehab that gave me an inpatient rehab that gave me a lot of experience and educational information. Here I am, an attorney who had been a member of Congress, and I'm in my 50s, and I'm being educated as to what alcoholism is and all of those things that I never, frankly, I thought I knew, but I knew nothing about. It's been 2.5 years, and I can't say that it's rosy every day, but I can say that I have a better sense of who I am. I can say that through my experience, strength, and hope, I know that I can't run everything. I know that I can't fulfill and chase my wants, that I have to do other things, that there's a bigger meaning to life, and that I ought to pursue that bigger meaning in life. I know that I have to accept the fact that I really, if John is left to John's own, and thinking of John, I will do selfish, reckless things that will lead to my death and will hurt the people around me that I love very much. And as tough as things may ever get, and there's wreckage from the past, there's relationships to be healed, there's financial challenges to be met, whatever they are, they're part of life. I created most of them through my alcoholism and with my disease, and the only shot I got is to try to work a program of recovery, to try to get myself to a better place, helping other people who are like me, and also being around people who are like me.
So what would be your message to the still out there sick and suffering addict or alcoholic, be it a congressman, be it a bus driver, be it the mailman, be it someone's father, someone's son? What would be your message out there to someone still sick and suffering?
I used to sit at a bar stool at my favorite place and have this conversation with myself. The conversation was basically, I don't know why everybody's mad at me, or I don't know why everybody's so detached from me, or I don't know why I feel so damn awful and sad and sick. I'm not hurting anybody. This is the only relief I get. This is the only way I feel good. This is the only time I don't feel tension. This is the only time for that brief period of time that I remember the buzz, that I don't feel like I'm hurting. And I came to recognize and realize that I was hurting everybody else around me, and most importantly, I was hurting myself. And what I've come to understand is that clarity, that moment of clarity, or those moments of clarity that come, revolve around the idea that I was never being really honest with myself about what my behavior was or what I was doing to myself and my using. And if you told me 2.5 years ago that I wouldn't have to ever pick up another drink, or I wouldn't have to smoke another joint, or I wouldn't have to do any other substance, take pills, snort coke, whatever, I would have told you you're crazy, because I couldn't survive then. And I had worked myself to the point that I was both physically dependent on it and mentally dependent on it. And I would have told you that there's just no damn way. I'll die first. And I was willing to die first. And I now recognize, as part of this honesty with myself, that was probably the most selfish thing that I was willing to do. And that once I sought help, and got myself around and surrendered myself to the words and the thoughts and the ideas and the experiences of other people who have been through what I've been through, some of them way worse than anything I ever experienced. Once I really understood that and surrendered to that and listened to that, that I could find peace and serenity, I could do without using, and I could start building a life that I really had hoped to be able to build all my life.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.